Hi, welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Today, we're going to be talking about the Book of the City of Ladies by Christine de Pizan. Now, Christine de Pizan, probably mispronouncing that name, sorry about that, but she first published this book in 1405. So that's a long time ago. This is an old text, and it was published during medieval times. And she wrote it as a response to several popular texts that she was reading at the time, who characterized women with a lot of negative traits. Popular fiction at the time was generalizing women as being promiscuous, naturally immoral, naturally wishy-washy, unable to be completely committed, weak in terms of their fortitude. Actually just a lot of generalizations that you see in television today, actually, or a lot of fiction works today. You still see that, but it was really strong back then in the medieval times, right? And this bothered Christine de Pizan, and she was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and write a book to demonstrate that women aren't naturally promiscuous, that they are not wishy-washy, they do have strong fortitude, they can commit to things, basically crushing a lot of the negative stereotypes and generalizations that was portrayed about women in popular texts. She goes about providing a myriad of women, all different types of women, both real and like legends, ones and myths, that basically crush a lot of those negative generalizations that were popular at the time. Now, because of this, several critics consider the Book of the City of Ladies the very first text on feminism. But there are also several other critics who believe that the Book of the City of Ladies is not a work of feminism at all. And to consider it a work of feminism is to misinterpret the true aim or the objective of what this text is trying to achieve. So, is the Book of the City of Ladies the very first work of feminism? That's what this video is about. Now, I have nothing against feminism. I think it's a great ideology. But I think that one of the problems with feminism is that it's not well defined. Feminism has this stigma, right? A lot of people don't like it. And so you have a lot of good feminists out there who are kind of almost afraid, I would say, or they don't want to go out there and say this is what feminism is. There's also this fear that if I define feminism, or I'm going to put it in a box, I'm going to limit the ideology, and that would defeat the whole purpose, right? Because feminism is all about taking women out of predefined boxes and categories, and so to categorize feminism would be against the whole ideology, right? But I think because it's not defined very well, you got a lot of misinterpretations of feminism. You got a lot of people who do not like feminism, who have strong feelings against feminism. And I think a lot of it is because what they think feminism is not actually what feminism is. They're misinterpreting it. And that's because maybe they're listening to people who are on the extreme end of feminism, right? And those people tend to misinterpret what feminism, I feel, is really about. The general public listens to those people, and a lot of the general public is like, yep, that's why I'm not into that ideology, and I think that's why it's a little too extreme and they're going a little bit too far. But ultimately, feminism, I think, is about addressing inequality. I mean, really, that's what it is, in a straightforward, in-your-face type of method. And I like that. I like the in-your-face method that feminism does to address inequality, whether it's inequality against women or just gender inequality, period. Putting both men or women in boxes. Even I would so far as to say just inequality, period, throughout things like race, sexual orientation, religious affiliation. I think what feminism has to say has a positive message to address all types of inequality. So let's get into that using quotes from the Book of the City of Ladies. Here's the first quote I want to talk about. And I want to say that's first quote actually from the introduction, which is written by the translator of this book, which is Rosalind Brown Grant. Again, we have another Penguin Classics edition. One of the biggest reasons why I like Penguin Classics editions because they have really good introductions. They're really good. They do a great job breaking it down for like somebody who's unfamiliar with the text completely. They do a really good job setting you up and building a context and just letting you know what the text is trying to achieve and its aim. And in this introduction does a good job doing that. So let me just start off with a quote from that. Virginia Woolf famously remarked that the most vital ingredient of literary creativity was neither genius nor inspiration, but quite simply a room of one's own. To her mind, authors could not produce anything of value if they had no place in which to cut themselves off from the cares and duties of their daily existence, so as to dedicate themselves to their writing. In Woolf's opinion, it was for this reason that fewer women appear in the canon of famous authors, particularly in the period prior to 1700. I hear often people will say, well, when you look at the overall achievement of humanity, most of that achievement is from men, right? And therefore, once you take that into consideration, you will see that men contribute more to society than women. Now, although that's not true, right, its perception can easily be obtained, right? And I think that that perception is easy to acquire because in the old school age, right, before the 1700s, women didn't really have the opportunity to do a lot of things, right? Because, you know, they were forced at home to work on the family. And, you know, women is a great example because it's very prominent. But that's with anything, right? I mean, for example, you look at back in the days of slavery in America, right? A slave was unable to achieve a lot because they didn't have the opportunity. It was illegal, for example, it was illegal to teach a slave how to read. So it's highly unlikely that a slave is going to be able to write anything, specifically a book, if you can't even read, right? You can apply that same type of thinking to women too, right? I mean, it's hard to achieve anything like writing a book or creating an invention or any type of innovation if all you are allowed to do is housework. Now today we have more opportunities. Women aren't expected to do that as much as they did back in those days, and slavery is now illegal in this country, America, right? But even still, that kind of oppression, which is rooted deeply in our culture from the past, it still perpetuates somewhat in society today, and you can see its ripple effect. You can still see it, and I think it still prevents a lot of achievement from happening because a lot of people have expectations that are rooted in that oppression from the past. Now let's actually go to the text. Christine de Pizan, she's going to further this point that was brought up by the translator. So Christine makes herself the main character of this book. She fictionalizes herself, and she's talking to three divine ladies, right? And this is one of the ladies she's talking about, and they're conversating about that very same issue. Why there's this perception that there's not as much achievement from women as there are men. The divine lady says, do you know why it is that women know less than men? It's because they are less exposed to a wide variety of experiences, since they have to stay at home all day to look after the household. There's nothing like a whole range of different experiences and activities for expanding the mind of any rational creature. So, my lady, if they have able minds which can learn and absorb as much as those of men, why don't they therefore know more? Then Christine says, so, my lady, if they have able minds which can learn and absorb as much as those of men, why don't they therefore know more? The divine lady says, the answer, my dear girl, is that it's not necessary for the public good for women to go around doing what men are supposed to do. As I informed you earlier, it's quite adequate that they perform the tasks for which they are fitted. As for this idea, that experience tells us that women's intelligence is inferior to that of men simply because we see that those around us generally know less than men do. Let's take the example of male peasants living in remote countryside or high mountains. You can give plenty of names of places where the men are so backward that they seem no better than beasts. Yet there's no doubt that nature made them as perfect in mind and body as the cleverest and the most learned men to be found in the towns and cities. All this comes down to their lack of education. Though don't forget what I said before about some men and women being more naturally endowed with intelligence than others. So there's a lot being said in that quote. the divine lady is saying, like, look, since women are in the household so much, they don't have the opportunity to gain a variety of different experiences the way men are able to. So therefore, you're not going to see as much output and achievement as you will with men. Straightforward, logical reason. The key to understanding this is that at the time, people believed that women are incapable of achieving more than men because they are inferior. And the divine lady is saying, no, that's not the case. It's just that they don't have the opportunity to have as much experiences as men do. Therefore, they're not going to achieve more. It has nothing to do with them being inferior. It's about the opportunity. It's very straightforward, it's very logical, but even today people are still confused by that because I think we still put groups of people, like women, for example, in boxes. We infer expectations on them, right, that we don't infer on other groups, and by doing that, we limit their possibility. Here's a perfect example of that I think that women have more pressure to have children at a certain age than men do. There's more pressure to be like, okay, what, you don't have a child yet? I mean, there's pressure from men too, but there's a lot of pressure from women. When you're around that age and you don't have maybe kids yet, there's this notion that, okay, what's wrong? What's going on? Is there a problem? Right? Maybe there's no problem. Maybe the woman just doesn't want to have kids. Who knows? But now maybe they want to achieve something else, and kids might get in the way of that. But because of this expectation, they kind of maybe pressured to do that, and it limits them. Now, if you actually listen to this quote, it has some anti-feminist notion, right? If you really listen to what she's saying, because the divine lady says it's not necessary for the public good for women to go around doing what men are supposed to do. Pizan is okay with women just being in the household and raising kids. She feels that's all right, that's fine. Now, there's a lot of feminists who would definitely disagree with that. And this is where it goes toward the notion that this is not a feminist work. Because despite the fact that Pizan is showing all these examples of women being just as virtuous, just as moral, just as strong as men, she still believes that women have a certain place in society. As caretakers, as they need to focus on the family as being the backbone of the man. They do have a certain role that's different from men. Listen to this quote, also from the text from Pizan herself. As for you ladies who are married, don't despair at being so downtrodden by your husbands, for it's not necessarily the best thing in the world to be free. This is proven by what the angel of the Lord said to Ezra. Those who used their free will fell into sin, turned their backs on God, and corrupted the righteous. For this reason they were destroyed. Those wives with husbands who are wayward, sinful, and cruel should do their best to tolerate them. They should try to overcome their husbands' wickedness and lead them back to a more reasonable and respectable path, if they possibly can. Even if their husbands are so steeped in sin that all their efforts come to nothing, these women's souls will at least have benefited greatly from having shown such patience. Moreover, everyone will praise them for it and will be on their side. As for you girls who are young virginal maidens, be pure and modest, timid and steadfast, for the wicked have set their snares to catch you. Keep your gaze directed downwards, say few words, and be cautious in everything you do. Arm yourselves with strength and virtue against the deceitful ways of seducers and avoid their company. Now, I would say that that's a very anti-feminist statement, right? Basically, Pizan is saying, look, women, support your husbands, whether they're good or bad. If they're bad husbands, still support them anyway. And if you're not married, be meek. Keep your head down. Don't cause a fuss, right? This is what she's saying. Now, of course, that goes against a lot of feminist ideology, right? If you're married to a bad person, you divorce them, right? You get away from it. You don't support a husband that's sinful anymore, And if you're not married, you keep your head up and you speak out. You be strong and you state your opinion, and you be loud if you want to be loud. That's more aligned with the feminist ideology. Christine de Pizan does not think that. Not in the book of the City of Ladies, actually. Now she's in the book. She quotes She brings up several women who are loud and who do speak up, state their opinion if it's a moral opinion. There's a lot of that going on. But ultimately, Christine Pizan is saying, look, women and men in terms of virtue and capability and strength and fortitude, they're the same. Yet it is true. Women have their place and men have theirs. And ultimately, a woman's place is that of a support of a man and his family. Now, when I was reading the book, there's 3 parts to the book, right? And I was reading part 1 and part 2, and she was bringing up all these examples of strong women, and I'm like, yeah, this is definitely, I don't see why people are saying this is not feminist text. I mean, it definitely is feminist text, that's for sure. Then I went to part 3. That's when it started breaking down, because it started getting really religious. Christine Pizan focused on women martyrs, talking about examples of women who submit, subservient toward their religion, and they are meek to be moral. That part 3 was definitely strongly religious, almost overtly religious. And I have no problem with religion. I'm a Christian myself. But it started really getting super religious. But it started focusing on the role that women should play as a subservient and as a support role. And by doing that, they are more virtuous. And in that way, it was very anti-feminist, I think. So the question remains, is this book a work of feminism or not? Let's go back to the introduction and the translator's opinion. Christine's concept of role models as moral exemplars therefore has nothing in common with that of modern feminism, with its emphasis on female pioneers striving to break down the bastions of male power and privilege. However, her aim was not to demand reform of the social order, but rather to show how the qualities exhibited by extraordinary women in the past could also be demonstrated by women of the present, acting in their more ordinary roles of daughter, wife, and mother. It was, after all, in this private domain that the women of Christine's day could in fact aspire to playing an influential role in medieval society. Skipping down a little further, Christine de Pizan's achievement as a defender of her sex lies not in her anticipation of the strategies which later feminists would employ, but rather in her critical engagement with the dominant ideology of her own day. Though many of her arguments in favor of women, such as her stress on the moral equality of male and female, have been superseded by other ideological and pragmatic concerns, they nonetheless commanded a great deal of authority in their own time. We need to pay Christine's critique of misogyny the respect it deserves and to see it as a dialogue with the society and culture of the late Middle Ages, rather than judging it by the standards of the late 20th century. Christine's voice in defense of women is utterly different from our own, but it was in its time a dissenting voice and one which spoke out to its audience with as much urgency and vigor as that of any modern feminist. That pretty much says it all, right? Relatively speaking, Christine was all about girl power. In her day, she was an extremist. She was defending the morality of women and saying that, hey, women are just as morally capable as men are, and they can contribute as much to society as men can. But in the Middle Ages, women still had their role that they had to play. And ultimately, Christine believed in those roles. So is this really a work of feminism? Yes and no. I would say it's a precursor to feminism. That's what I would say. And translator is right. We should give Christine de Pizan the respect that she deserves. She's a trendsetter, an early pioneer of standing up for women, and really just standing up against inequality. And that's really what feminism is about, standing up against inequality and forcing people into generalizations and archetypes that are not true, that are false, which prohibit somebody from achieving or realizing their true potential. And that's what I'm all about. Let's do away with that and let's go toward truth. Truth is the way we realize our true potential. Inequality ultimately is rooted in falsehood. And any ideology that's against that, whether that's feminism or whatever, I'm for. Check it out. The book, of the City of Ladies. If you want examples of old school, strong women,